"This isn't for you." That's what she said. Those 4 words. She looked me dead in the eyes, said them slow and clear like she wanted each one to land, and then she tore the envelope apart with her bare hands. I watched the pieces fall onto the kitchen table. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I just stood there while the most important letter of my life became confetti in my mother-in-law's hands, and I told myself what I always told myself back then, that maybe she was right. My name is Victoria, and for 2 years I believed I wasn't good enough for Harvard. For 2 years, I carried that rejection like a wound that never fully closed. I rearranged my entire life around a lie. And the woman who told me that lie smiled at my wedding, sat at my dinner table, and called herself family. But before I tell you everything, if you're new here, please subscribe and hit that notification bell. Because this story is long, it is heavy, and there is a lot more where this came from. You don't want to miss what comes next. Now, let me take you back to the beginning. I grew up in Atlanta, Georgia. My mother worked double shifts at a hospital for most of my childhood, and my father drove trucks across state lines 5 days a week. We weren't poor, but we weren't comfortable either. We were the kind of family that knew exactly how much was in the bank account at all times, that planned every grocery trip down to the last dollar, and that understood very clearly that the way out, the real way out, was education. My mother said it so many times it became background noise in our house. You study, Victoria. You study and you get yourself somewhere nobody can take from you. I heard it so often I stopped hearing it. Until I was 18 and realized she had been right about everything. I was a good student. Not a perfect student. Not the kind who made it look effortless, but the kind who stayed up past midnight and highlighted textbooks until the pages bled color and showed up to every office hour and rewrote papers 3 and 4 times before turning them in. I worked for every grade I got. I applied to 14 colleges during my senior year of high school, and Harvard was the one I told almost no one about. It felt too big to say out loud, like saying it would jinx it. So I applied quietly, wrote my essays, submitted everything on time, and waited. While I was waiting, I met Daniel. Daniel Carter was 23 when I was 19. I had just started my sophomore year at a small college in Georgia, still waiting to hear back from a few transfer applications I had sent out on a whim. We met at a bookstore, which I know sounds like something out of a movie, but that's exactly what happened. He was looking for a book he couldn't remember the title of. I was in the same aisle looking for something completely different, and we ended up talking for almost 2 hours. He was smart, genuinely smart. The kind of person who reads things because they want to understand the world, not because they want to impress anyone. I liked that about him immediately. We dated for 8 months before he introduced me to his mother. Her name was Patricia Carter. She was 61 years old, lived alone in a large house in a suburb of Charlotte, North Carolina, and within 4 minutes of meeting me, she had already found 3 things to comment on. My hair, the way I pronounced a word, and the fact that I was still in college and figuring things out. She said that last part with a small smile, the kind that isn't really a smile, but your brain files under smile anyway because it doesn't know what else to do with it. Daniel didn't notice. Or if he noticed, he didn't say anything. He poured more sweet tea and changed the subject, and Patricia moved on, and I told myself this was normal. First impressions are awkward. People say strange things when they're nervous. She was just protective of her son. I made excuses for her before I even had enough information to know I would spend years making excuses for her. We got engaged 14 months later. I was 21. Daniel was 24. Patricia cried at the announcement, which I thought meant she was happy. I understand now that people cry for many different reasons. We set the wedding for the following spring and decided that in the meantime, Daniel and I would live together in Charlotte, which meant I was suddenly within 30 minutes of Patricia Carter at all times. What had been occasional discomfort became something I lived inside of. She came over without calling. She rearranged things in our apartment. She made comments about the food I cooked, the way I kept the kitchen, the hours I kept, the friends I had, the way I spent money, the clothes I wore. None of it was ever loud or obvious. It was always wrapped in something that looked like concern. I just want what's best for Daniel. I'm only saying this because I care about you both. Don't take it the wrong way, Victoria. I'm just being honest. I was applying to graduate programs at the time. I had always planned to continue my education. I wanted to study public health policy, wanted to work on systems that affected communities like the one I grew up in, wanted to do something that actually mattered. I had applied to several strong programs, but the one I cared about most, the one I had been quietly building toward since I was 19 years old and standing in that bookstore aisle, was Harvard's School of Public Health. I submitted my application in December. I did not tell Patricia. I told Daniel, because I told Daniel everything, and he was proud of me. He kissed me on the forehead and said he knew I would get in. And I laughed and told him not to say that because I didn't want to jinx it. The notification said my admissions decision letter would arrive in early April. On April 7th, I was at work. I worked at a nonprofit in downtown Charlotte, part-time, while finishing my undergraduate degree online. I got off at 4 in the afternoon. When I pulled into our apartment parking lot, Patricia's car was in my space. She had a key to our apartment. Daniel had given it to her 6 months earlier without asking me, and I had never directly told him how much that bothered me, which was its own problem that I would not understand the full weight of until much later. I walked in and Patricia was in the kitchen. There was an envelope on the table. She was holding a second envelope. The return address on the one in her hands was Cambridge, Massachusetts. She had already opened it. I stood very still in the doorway. My work bag was still on my shoulder. She looked at me, and for a moment she didn't say anything. Then she put the letter down on the table, folded it back up, and slid it back into the envelope. She looked at me again, and then she picked up the envelope with both hands and tore it down the middle. Then again, then again. She let the pieces fall onto the table, and she looked at me and she said, "This isn't for you, Victoria. You don't need this. You have Daniel. You have a good life already. Some things aren't meant to be, and that's okay." I didn't say a word. I didn't know in that moment that the letter was an acceptance. I didn't know what she had read before she destroyed it. All I knew was that she had opened my mail, read it, and decided to tear it apart, and that she was standing in my kitchen talking to me about what was and wasn't meant for me like she had the right to make that call. My brain went somewhere quiet and distant, the way it does when something is too big to process in real time. I nodded. I said something. I honestly don't remember what I said. Patricia left about 20 minutes later. I stood in the kitchen for a long time looking at the pieces of the envelope on the table. I threw them away. Later that night, I told Daniel that I had gotten a rejection letter from Harvard. He hugged me and told me he was sorry and that I would find something just as good. I nodded into his shoulder. I believed I had been rejected. Why wouldn't I? I had no reason to think otherwise. I had seen the look on Patricia's face before she tore it. I had heard her voice. It had sounded like pity, like something that confirmed what I already feared deep down, that I had reached too far and been told no. I enrolled in a different graduate program 3 months later. A good school, a solid program, but not the one I wanted. I told myself it was fine. I told myself the answer would have been no anyway. I made peace with it in the way you make peace with things you can't change. Not really, not fully, but enough to keep moving. For 2 years, I kept moving. I married Daniel in May. The wedding was beautiful. Patricia wore a dress almost the same shade as mine, which several people commented on, and which I chose not to make a thing of because it was my wedding day and I wanted to be happy. I was happy, or I was close enough to it. I loved Daniel. I believed we were building something real. The first year of marriage was mostly good. The second year was harder. Not because of Daniel and me. We were solid. We communicated. We rarely fought. But because of the weight that had built up around us without either of us really naming it. Patricia was a constant presence. She had opinions about everything. Our finances, our apartment, whether we should move, when we should have children, how I was progressing in my graduate program, what I was planning to do with my degree. She never said anything directly offensive most of the time. She was too smart for that. She operated in suggestion and implication and the strategic use of silence. She would say something cutting and then look at Daniel, not at me, when she said it, like she was reporting back to him about something I had failed at. Daniel, for his part, was not a bad husband. He was a man who had been raised by a woman who took up a lot of space, and he had learned to manage her by minimizing things. If he didn't name it, it wasn't a problem. If he changed the subject fast enough, the tension dissolved. This worked beautifully when he was a child, and it worked terribly in our marriage. I started keeping a journal during the second year, not because I was planning anything, but because I needed somewhere to put things. I wrote down dates and conversations and specific things Patricia said, not out of strategy, out of sanity. I needed a place where I could say what I actually felt without worrying about how it landed. It was during this time that I decided to apply to a fellowship, a competitive policy fellowship, a year-long program based in Washington, D.C., that placed people in federal agencies to work on health equity initiatives. It was exactly the kind of thing I had been working toward. I found out about it through a former professor who thought I would be a strong candidate. I applied without telling anyone except Daniel. 2 months later, I got a call. Not a letter this time, a phone call. I was sitting in my car in the parking lot of our apartment building when my phone rang and a woman introduced herself and told me I had been selected as a finalist and asked if I was still interested. I said yes so fast I barely heard my own voice. As part of the application process, my references were contacted. One of my references was a woman named Dr. Ellen Marsh, who had been one of my undergraduate advisors and who knew me well enough to have written me a strong letter years before when I applied to graduate schools. When Dr. Marsh called to congratulate me on making the finalist round, she mentioned something in passing that I almost didn't catch. She said, "And of course this follows up on the Harvard situation, which I always thought was such a shame." I stopped. "What Harvard situation?" A pause. "Your acceptance, Victoria. When you didn't respond to the acceptance offer. They reached out to me at some point, I believe to follow up, because they hadn't heard back from you. I told them I would pass the message along, but I never heard from you, so I assumed you had decided to go a different direction." The parking lot was very quiet. "Dr. Marsh," I said, and my voice was completely flat. "I was never accepted to Harvard. I received a rejection." Another pause. Longer this time. "Victoria, that's not possible. I saw your file. You were admitted. I would not have confused that." I thanked her. I ended the call. I sat in that parking lot for 45 minutes without moving. Then I went inside and I went to my journal and I sat on the floor of our bedroom. And I thought about Patricia standing in my kitchen, holding that envelope with the Cambridge return address, tearing it down the middle saying, "This isn't for you, Victoria." And I understood all at once and completely and with a clarity that felt like something cracking open inside my chest, that she had not read a rejection letter. She had read an acceptance, and she had destroyed it anyway. And then she had stood in front of me and let me believe I had failed. I did not cry. I want to be honest about that. I thought I would. I had cried easily when I was younger, had cried at rejections and disappointments and the particular kind of loneliness that comes from working hard and still feeling like it isn't enough. But sitting on that floor, I didn't cry. I felt something settle in me instead. Something go very still and very cold and very clear. Like the moment before a storm when all the noise stops and the air changes and you know, without looking up, that everything is about to be different. I thought about 2 years. I thought about every day for 2 years that I had carried that rejection like it was the truth. Every day I had chosen a smaller path because I believed the bigger one had been closed to me. Every time I had talked myself out of reaching for something, because some part of my brain said quietly, "You already tried for your best," and it said no. 2 years of living inside a lie that someone else told for me. 2 years of building my life around damage that someone else chose to cause. I sat with that for a long time. Then I stood up. I washed my face. I went into the kitchen and I started cooking dinner. And while I stood at the stove, I made exactly one decision. I was not going to do anything yet. Not that night, not that week. I was going to let the information sit inside me, and I was going to wait until I knew exactly what I wanted to do and exactly how I wanted to do it. Patricia had taken 2 years from me. I could wait a little longer. The fellowship finalist process continued. I moved forward in the rounds, completed my interviews, submitted additional materials. 3 weeks after my conversation with Dr. Marsh, I received a formal offer. I had been selected. The fellowship was mine if I wanted it. I sat down across from Daniel that evening and I told him everything. Not just about the fellowship, about all of it. About what Dr. Marsh had told me. About what I now understood about that day in April 2 years ago. About the envelope on the kitchen table and the pieces of paper Patricia had let fall like they were nothing. Daniel was silent for a very long time. When he finally spoke, he said, "Victoria, are you sure?" I looked at him. Yes. He asked me to give him a few days. He said he needed to process it. He said he couldn't believe his mother would do something like that. He said, and this was the part I found hardest, he said, "Maybe she thought she was protecting you." I said, "From what, Daniel? From a letter? From an opportunity? From a decision I had every right to make for myself?" He didn't answer. I gave him his few days. I was patient. I had already decided that I was going to be patient through all of it, because patience was the thing that Patricia had never expected from me, and I was done doing what other people expected. "This isn't for you." Those were the words she used again later, but the first time she said them, I didn't understand what they would cost me. I just stood there, holding my breath, trying to be the kind of woman who didn't make scenes, who didn't overreact, who kept things together even when something felt wrong deep in her chest. My name is Victoria. I'm a Black woman from Atlanta, and at the time I believed that patience was strength. I believed that if I stayed calm long enough, people would eventually treat me fairly. I was wrong about that, but I didn't know it yet. After my conversation with Dr. Marsh, everything shifted. Not on the outside right away, but inside me. Something locked into place. I stopped second-guessing my memory. I stopped softening what had happened. For 2 years, I had told the story gently, even in my own head. I said things like, maybe there was a misunderstanding, or maybe I just wasn't good enough. But now I knew exactly what had happened. Patricia had opened my letter, read my acceptance, and made a decision for me. She didn't hesitate. She didn't ask. She didn't even consider that I had a right to my own life. She looked at an opportunity I had worked for, something that meant everything to me, and she decided it didn't fit into the version of my life that worked best for her. And I let her. That was the part that sat heavy in my chest. Not just what she did, but how easily I accepted it. How quickly I folded myself into the version of reality she handed me. I didn't question it. I didn't call anyone. I didn't follow up. I just believed the worst about myself and moved on. That realization stayed with me in the days after I spoke to Daniel. I wasn't angry in a loud way. I wasn't yelling or slamming doors. I was quiet, focused, watching. Daniel took his few days. During that time, he barely spoke about it. He went to work, came home, ate dinner, and avoided the subject like it might disappear if he gave it enough space. I didn't push him. I had already said what I needed to say. I had already told him the truth. What he did with it was his decision. But I paid attention to everything. The way he avoided eye contact when his phone lit up with his mother's name. The way he hesitated before answering her calls. The way he said, "I'll talk to her," but never actually did. On the third night, he finally sat down across from me at the kitchen table. The same table where that envelope had been torn apart 2 years earlier. He looked tired. Not angry, not defensive, just tired. "I talked to her," he said. "I didn't ask how it went. I just waited. She said she doesn't remember it that way," he continued. "She said the letter didn't look like an acceptance, that it was confusing, that she thought she was helping. Helping." That word landed harder than anything else. I looked at him and said, "Did you ask her why she opened my mail?" He hesitated. "She said she didn't think it was a big deal. We've always shared things like that." "We," I repeated. "You and her, not me." He didn't respond to that. I let a few seconds pass, then I asked, "Did she apologize?" Another pause. "She said she was sorry if I felt like she crossed a line." I nodded slowly. That told me everything I needed to know. "I got the fellowship," I said, shifting the conversation. My voice was steady. "It's in DC. It starts in 3 months." He blinked, like he had almost forgotten. That's amazing, Victoria." "It is," I said, "and I'm going." That was the first moment something real showed on his face. Not confusion, not hesitation, fear. "Going?" he asked. "Like, moving?" "Yes." "For a year?" "Yes." "And what about us?" There it was. I held his gaze and said, "That's up to you." He leaned back in his chair, running a hand over his face. "You're asking me to leave everything here. My job, my life. I'm not asking you to do anything." I interrupted calmly. "I'm telling you what I'm doing." Silence filled the space between us. Not loud, not dramatic, just heavy. "I need time to think about this," he said finally. I nodded. "Take all the time you need." And I meant it. Because for the first time in a long time, I wasn't waiting for someone else to decide what my life was going to look like. I wasn't shrinking myself to make things easier. I wasn't adjusting my dreams to fit someone else's comfort. I had already lost 2 years. I wasn't going to lose another day. Later that night, after Daniel went to bed, I sat alone in the living room with my journal. I flipped back through the pages, reading entries I had written months ago. Small things. Comments Patricia had made. Moments that felt off at the time but that I had dismissed. It was all there. A pattern I had seen but never fully named. Until now. I closed the journal and set it aside. Then I picked up my phone and drafted an email. Not to Patricia. Not yet. This one was to Harvard. I kept it simple. I explained that I had recently learned there may have been a misunderstanding regarding my admissions decision from 2 years prior. I asked if there was any record of my application and its outcome. I read it twice, then I sent it. And as soon as I did, I felt something shift again. Not anger, not relief. Something steadier than both. Control. For the first time since that envelope hit the table, I was no longer reacting to what had been done to me. I was deciding what happened next. I didn't tell Daniel about the email. Not because I was hiding it, but because I no longer felt the need to explain every step I took. That version of me, the one who needed validation before making a move, was gone. In her place, there was someone quieter, more precise. Someone who understood that not every decision needed an audience. 2 days later, I got a response. I was at work when the notification came through. I didn't open it right away. I let it sit there on my screen while I finished what I was doing. Not out of fear, but out of control. I was done letting moments like that own me. When I finally opened it, the message was clear. They confirmed my acceptance. Not just that, I had been offered a place with strong consideration for financial support. They had attempted to contact me more than once after receiving no response. Eventually, they assumed I had declined. I read the email twice, then a third time. There it was, in plain language. No confusion, no gray area. Just the truth, written in a way that couldn't be softened or reinterpreted. 2 years. I closed my laptop slowly and sat there for a moment. I thought about the version of me who stood in that kitchen, watching her future get torn apart. I thought about how small I made myself after that, how I adjusted, how I settled, and then I let that version of me go. That night, I didn't bring it up over dinner. I didn't turn it into a conversation or a confrontation. Instead, I waited until Patricia did what she always did. She showed up unannounced. The sound of her key turning in the lock came right on time, like it always had. But this time, the door didn't open. There was a pause, then another attempt. Then the doorbell rang. Once, twice, 3 times, louder each time. Daniel looked at me from the couch. I held his gaze for a second, then stood up and walked to the door. I opened it calmly. Patricia stood there, already irritated. "Why isn't the door opening? I've been standing here." "I changed the locks," I said. She blinked. "Just once." "You what?" "I changed the locks," I repeated. "This is my home, and from now on, no one comes in without being invited." Her expression shifted, not into anger right away, but into something else. Surprise. Not because of what I said, but because of how I said it. Behind me, Daniel didn't move. "I'm his mother," she said, her voice tighter now. "And I'm his wife," I replied, just as calm. "And I'm also the person whose future you decided to destroy without asking." That landed. For the first time, she didn't have a response ready. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't step closer. I didn't need to. "I know about Harvard," I continued. "I have confirmation. I know exactly what you did." Silence. Real silence this time. "You don't get to decide what I deserve," I said. "Not then. Not now." She looked past me toward Daniel, like she always did when she wanted support, but he didn't step in. He didn't speak. And that told me everything I needed to know. I stepped back slightly and held the door. "If you want to be part of this life," I said, "you learn respect. If not, this is where it ends." I didn't wait for her answer. I closed the door. And just like that, for the first time in 2 years, my life felt like it belonged to me again.